Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna pick you up by 6:30. Look, Natalie, I know how much prom means to you. It's our last dance together in high school. This is going to be a really romantic moment. I wouldn't miss it for the world. You know, I just want this night to be perfect for you, okay, babe? I need to pick out the best tie I have to make my outfit look incredible. Yeah. Okay. Bye. Love you. No, none of these look good. Whoa, wait a second. What? It's perfect. You know what? It's a Jar Jar Binks tie. Screw it, I'm just gonna leave it like this. Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace was released in May of 1999, and this is the first movie in the Star Wars saga chronologically. In these next few months leading up to Star Wars Episode 8 The Last Jedi, I'm going to review all of the Star Wars films. This is my personal favorite movie series of all time, and I felt like I needed to express my thoughts for each film individually in videos. Now, The Phantom Menace to me holds a couple of very unique titles among all movies. The first one, I think this is still, to this day, the most anticipated movie of all time. The only movie that could have possibly usurped it is Episode 7, The Force Awakens, but I still think The Phantom Menace is the most anticipated movie ever. The world didn't have any Star Wars movies for 16 years. Return of the Jedi was released in May of 1983. There was a whole long gap between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. And speaking of the original trilogy, that was beloved by fans and critics alike. Everyone was ridiculously excited for The Phantom Menace. And this movie was written and directed once again by George Lucas, the mastermind behind Star Wars. And this is the first time he had directed a Star Wars movie since Episode 4, so there's so much hype going into this film. And that anticipation led to a lot of denial. And then once people got over their denial, the second unique title for The Phantom Menace is created. And that is the most disappointing movie of all time. The original trilogy of Star Wars is so good, and then you get The Phantom Menace, which is not really a good film. Now, warning, if you have not seen The Phantom Menace, 1, it came out 18 years ago, what on earth have you been doing that entire time? But 2, I will be spoiling it in this review. So let's dive into The Phantom Menace. There's actually quite a few things I unapologetically love about this movie. First off, the visual effects. I mean, seriously, the effects in this movie look brilliant, especially for 1999. Now, obviously The Matrix is clearly a better movie than The Phantom Menace, but I think it's a joke the Academy Awards gave it Best Visual Effects over this movie. And the effects still hold up pretty well today. Some of the creature designs don't look too good, like, you know, Jar Jar Binks, but beyond that, everything I think looks incredible. The environments are awesome, the plant designs are fantastic, the visual style of this movie is really good. There is a little bit too much CGI, which we'll talk on a little bit more in my other prequel reviews, but for the most part, I think it's integrated pretty well, and there's more sets in this movie than there are in the other prequels. The world designs, the character designs, the ship designs in this movie are pretty much just as good as the original Star Wars trilogy. I love some of the vehicles in this movie. The Naboo Starfighter is an awesome looking ship. There's also plenty of talented actors in this movie. Ewan McGregor is fantastic as a young Obi-Wan Kenobi. Qui-Gon Jinn, played by Liam Neeson, is really great. I mean, who doesn't love Liam Neeson? Some amazing cast members. Frank Oz returns, Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu, and of course Ian McDiarmid as Emperor Palpatine himself, or Chancellor Palpatine in this case. He is so good in that role. Don't worry, we're going to talk about some of the other actors in this movie that aren't quite as good in just a little bit, but let's focus on the good parts of this movie here. Ray Park as Darth Maul. I have his autograph right there on my shelf. This dude as Darth Maul is pretty awesome. His character design is so creepy, and of course he has that legendary double-bladed lightsaber that is super cool. And then The Phantom Menace, in my opinion, has the two single best scenes in the entire Star Wars prequel trilogy. The first one is the Darth Maul versus Obi-Wan versus Qui-Gon Jinn Duel of the Fates. That is definitely the best lightsaber fight in the prequel trilogy. It doesn't carry the emotional weight that the lightsaber fights in the original trilogy did, but it's a really well choreographed fight that looks awesome in a really nice location. And then my number one favorite scene out of all of the prequels is by far the pod race. I love the pod racers. The first reason is because this is a different side of the Star Wars universe that we haven't seen. Sporting events in Star Wars really hadn't been covered in the original trilogy, so it was super cool to get to see that. I also just love it because the pod racers are really cool designs. They look awesome. All of the different alien species for the pod racer drivers, those are fantastic. And my favorite thing about pod racers is the sound effect they made for the pod racers themselves. It's a great sound effect. Not to mention the pod racer scene also inspired one of the greatest Nintendo 64 games ever created. George Lucas and the editors of this film also made a really bold decision in the pod race. They did not use John Williams' score for the most part. You pretty much just have the sound effects of the pod racers until the end. And John Williams, of course, is one of the greatest composers of all time. His scores are legendary, so not using them in the pod race was a bold move, but I think it paid off really well. And like I just said, John Williams' score. If there's one thing everyone in the universe can agree on that the Star Wars prequels got right, was John Williams' music. His Duel of the Fates track here is one of the greatest things ever written for Star Wars. It's iconic today. And the number one reason I don't hate The Phantom Menace and don't hate any of the prequels and don't hate anything Star Wars is because it's Star Wars. I'm obsessed with this universe. I love Star Wars so much. It's my favorite movie series of all time. So I'm just going to be a little bit biased towards Star Wars at all times. I can admit when Star Wars isn't very good, like this movie. However, I still love this movie in a weird way because it's Star Wars. And just a fun fact, this is the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater. I was like 2 years old and my mom took me to go see The Phantom Menace. It's kind of like she set up my entire life for me then. I also saw this movie when it was re-released in 3D and have the collectible 3D glasses right there. So, that's the good of The Phantom Menace. I think there's a lot of stuff to actually like in this movie, even if you're just a casual fan. But then there's also a lot of bad stuff. The bad in this movie can be directed all to one thing, and that's George Lucas's script. Oh my gosh, this script is horrible. First off, the story of this movie hinges on trade disputes and signings of treaties. You know, that's what everyone wanted to see in Star Wars, was treaties being signed. There's tons of politics in this movie, and I think it's kind of cool to get to see some of the politics behind the Star Wars universe, but there's way too much. But the story isn't the only terrible thing about this script. Let's talk about the dialogue in this movie. Are you an angel? You're right, Master. Negotiations were short. I mean, seriously, this dialogue sounds ridiculously terrible, and it doesn't really help the actors out at all. I mentioned there's some amazing cast members in this movie. Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson, Natalie Portman. She's won a freaking Oscar, but she's terrible in this movie because the script gives her nothing good to work with. And George Lucas's direction gives nothing interesting for the characters to do during these dialogue scenes. Pretty much every scene that's just talking in The Phantom Menace is either people sitting down and talking, walking and talking, and standing up and talking. That's about it. They don't do anything interesting while they're talking. A good rule for movies is to have characters interact while also doing some form of action to kind of engage the audience. This movie fails at that completely. And you know, I mentioned how good Darth Maul was earlier in this review. You know why everyone loves Darth Maul, why he's by far the most popular thing from this movie, why he's the one they put on all of the marketing campaigns for the 3D re-release? It's because Darth Maul has 1, 2, 3 lines of dialogue in this entire movie. He hardly ever talks. Ray Park doesn't even do the voice acting for Darth Maul. He's literally just a stuntman who performs cool tricks as Darth Maul. He's not even the same actor who does the voice. That's how little Darth Maul talks, and that's why everyone loves him. There's also some very interesting alien characters in this movie. First off, Watto is kind of a stereotype as a sleazy Middle Eastern man. You have the Nemoidians, also kind of a stereotype of a generic Asian person. And then of course you have Jar Jar Binks!
I love you!
You almost got us killed. Are you brainless?
I speak.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent. Now get out of here.
No, Mr. Stay. Mr. called Jar Jar Binks. Mr. your humble servant.
That won't be necessary.
Oh, but it is. 'Tis demanded by the gods, it is.
Besides Mr. Binks, one of the most hated parts about The Phantom Menace, of course, is young Anakin Skywalker, portrayed by Jake Lloyd. Now honestly, I kind of feel bad for Jake Lloyd. His life really went downhill after this movie. I'm pretty sure he's in prison now or something, but he is really, really terrible in this film. I can forgive his performance to an extent because he's a very young kid. It's hard to find extremely talented child actors, but I don't know if George Lucas watched Jingle All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger and was like, Jake Lloyd, that's the kid I want to play my young Anakin. But his performance is really terrible. The dialogue they have him say is awful, and his delivery is horrible in this movie. But the thing I hate the most about young Anakin Skywalker in this movie is not Jake Lloyd's performance, it's the direction they took the character in. Anakin Skywalker, spoiler alert, grows up to be Darth Vader, of course. And Darth Vader is the biggest, coolest, baddest villain in the entire galaxy, in the entire Star Wars universe. He is super dark in the original trilogy, and you would think that a young Darth Vader would have had a really rough upbringing. And George Lucas, I think, made a really good storytelling choice with this film. Anakin Skywalker in this movie is a slave. That makes sense. That's terrible. You'd think a kid who's been enslaved his entire life would be, you know, depressed, right? But no, Anakin Skywalker in this movie is the most happy-go-lucky kid that screams, seems like, yahoo, woohoo, now this is pod racing, and oh my gosh, why? It seriously makes no sense to me. Just Jake Lloyd's young Anakin Skywalker in about 13 years in the Star Wars universe is going to become Darth Vader. Like, none of that adds up to me at all. Another terrible thing about this movie is the main character. The reason I threw up the air quotes there is because there really isn't a main character. Now, the story is mostly about Anakin, so I guess you can make the debate he's the main character, but he doesn't really show up until about a third or maybe even more than that of the way into this film. Qui-Gon's certainly not the main character, neither is Obi-Wan Kenobi. There really isn't a central character to grasp onto in this movie. In the original trilogy, we had Luke Skywalker. The new trilogy, we have Rey. You have that main character you get to follow throughout this journey. This movie, you don't get that and it loses you really quickly. And then there's the end of the movie. There's like 4 storylines going on at once, which is way too much to follow. And then they kill off Liam Neeson's Qui-Gon Jinn, who was one of the cooler characters in this film. And then they kill off, in the live action movies at least, he was resurrected in some cartoons, they kill off Darth Maul, the best part of this entire movie. Those decisions were so dumb. And when it all boils down, you think about The Phantom Menace and you're like, wait a second, did that movie matter? Does that movie matter at all to the Star Wars saga? There's a reason there's a video on YouTube called Star Wars The Phantom Edit. This movie doesn't need to exist. It has no significant bearing in the Star Wars universe. But I couldn't go through this entire review without mentioning midi-chlorians, everyone's favorite thing. Honestly, they're so dumb. I think they have been buried to death. I don't need to beat a dead horse. You guys know how bad midi-chlorians are. So in conclusion, I did rant a lot in this video, but I still like this movie because it's Star Wars, because I grew up with it. And there are some terrible, absolutely terrible things in this movie, but I also think there are some things that are very positive and actually redeem the film to an extent. So for this and all my other Star Wars reviews, I feel like I should get a free pass on giving a movie way too high of a rating. It's just because I love Star Wars so much. my rating for The Phantom Menace is going to be a 6 out of 10. So that's my review for Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and coming soon will be reviews for all of the Star Wars movies leading up to the release of The Last Jedi this December. I'm super excited. Tell me what's your favorite part about The Phantom Menace down in the comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and down in the description you'll find a link so you can subscribe to my Facebook page, and I'll see you guys next time. It's been Lee Parham signing off.